What I've seen over these months is that every time they make progress and they move closer and closer to that hope for peace, the warmongers in the deep state step up and try to do everything they can to stop them. The deep state within the intelligence community weaponizes intelligence to try to undermine progress. They leak it to their friends in the mainstream propaganda media to try to spread this and push a false narrative. They foment fear and hysteria as a way to justify the continuing of the war and their efforts to undermine President Trump's efforts towards peace. And do so specifically in this case in order to try to pull the US military into a direct conflict with Russia, which is ultimately what the EU and NATO want.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict is set to enter its fourth year in 2026, yet there is still no sign of peace at the end of the tunnel. Since taking office in January 2025, US President Donald Trump has been trying hard to play peacemaker in a war he once said would be the easiest to resolve, citing his relationship with his Russian counterpart. But Vladimir Putin is not someone Trump can intimidate with sanctions, tariffs, or trade pressure, or bully with a fiery temperament. He is no Zelensky. While Putin remains firm on his demands, Western media this week reported that his territorial ambitions remain unchanged and that Moscow still seeks to occupy more Ukrainian territory. Reports also claimed Putin is planning to attack EU countries and NATO. Calling these claims lies, and as Putin accused Western politicians of using fear to justify higher military spending, U.S. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard launched a sharp attack on Europe and NATO. What's really happening? Is America pulling itself out of NATO? Western media reported that, according to U.S. intelligence, Russian President Vladimir Putin's territorial ambitions remain unchanged and that Moscow still seeks to occupy Ukrainian territory. Soon after these reports surfaced, Trump's intelligence chief went on a rampage against the outlet, calling the claims lies and propaganda pushed on behalf of warmongers to undermine Trump's peace efforts. In a follow-up post on her personal X account, DNI Tulsi Gabbard said Russia lacks the capability to conquer and occupy Ukraine, let alone invade Europe, dismissing such claims as alarmist. She said U.S. intelligence does not support the European and NATO narrative that Moscow aims to occupy Europe. Gabbard accused deep state warmongers and sections of the Western media of spreading these narratives. Are Europe and NATO trying to push U.S. and Russian troops into direct confrontation? That's not our claim. DNI Gabbard is claiming this. At a Turning Point USA event, Gabbard sharply criticized detractors of President Donald Trump, accusing them of sabotaging his efforts to end the brutal conflict that has left more than 1 million people wounded or killed on both sides. She directly accused EU and NATO leaders of pushing the U.S. toward a conflict with Russia while undermining peace talks, warning that deep state forces are actively working to block negotiations and prolong the war.
President Trump has been persistently and relentlessly pursuing a peace deal to finally end the war between Russia and Ukraine. He talks frequently about the need to end the killing and the bloodshed, and his teams are negotiating now as we gather here. But what I've seen over these months is that every time they make progress and they move closer and closer to that hope for peace, the warmongers in the deep state step up and try to do everything they can to stop them. Predictably, they use the same old tactics that they've always used. The deep state within the intelligence community weaponizes intelligence to try to undermine progress. They leak it to their friends in the mainstream propaganda media to try to spread this and push a false narrative. They foment fear and hysteria as a way to justify the continuing of the war and their efforts to undermine President Trump's efforts towards peace. And do so specifically in this case in order to try to pull the U.S. military into a direct conflict with Russia, which is ultimately what the EU and NATO want. We cannot allow this to happen. We have to see clearly what's happening before our very eyes and stand united in this cause of peace.
Backing Gabbard, Putin's envoy, Kirill Dmitriev, praised her for challenging what he called war-driven narratives and exposing deep state warmongers. He said voices like hers are needed to restore sanity, peace, and security. Further praising her Turning Point USA speech, Dmitriev wrote on X, DNI Tulsi Gabbard exposed the warmongers pushing World War III and the massive fake narrative media machine that sells fear as policy. As the U.S. attempts to negotiate peace between Russia and Ukraine, Zelensky's European allies appear determined to protect Ukraine's interests, or perhaps their own. Amid the back and forth, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz warned that the decades of Pax Americana, the era of U.S.-guaranteed European security, are effectively over, urging European nations to strengthen their own defenses. Speaking at the CSU Congress, Merz said U.S. strategic priorities have shifted and Europe must now defend its own interests. He also cautioned against excessive U.S. concessions to Moscow to end the Ukraine war.
The decades of Pax Americana are largely over for us here in Europe, and also for us specifically in Germany. It no longer truly exists in the same way that we once knew it. And nostalgia won't help either. And I would be one of the last people not to gladly indulge in that nostalgia. But it doesn't help. That's just how it is. The Americans are now pursuing their own interests very, very forcefully. Yes, we are not at war, but we are also no longer living solely in peace. And we need to be clear about that, if we do it at the expense of our industry. In any case, I am not willing to prioritize environmental and climate protection so highly that a large part of our industrial core in the Federal Republic of Germany is lost as a result. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, if you truly want to damage, if not completely destroy, democracy in Germany, then you just have to keep on doing exactly that.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio responded to Merz's remarks during a year-end State Department press briefing. Reacting to the comments, Rubio said the U.S. remains committed to NATO and the European alliance, stressing that America's commitment is not just rhetorical. Taking a dig at Europe, Rubio added that the only thing the U.S. asks of its European allies is to improve their own defense capabilities.
Russia has deployed its latest nuclear-capable missile system to Belarus, according to that country's leadership. We've heard from a number of European leaders, the Chancellor of Germany himself, that they think this era of Pax Americana is gone, that they are needing to prepare to be on a war footing because of the threat from Putin. Do you believe, does this administration believe today that Vladimir Putin will end his march on the eastern flank of Ukraine? And do you stand by our European allies against any kind of attack?
Look, we have heard the same concerns from our allies in NATO. It's why we are in NATO. It's why we meet with them. It's why we talk to them all the time. I've spoken to Mark Rutte this year probably 40 times, and he's spoken to multiple people in our administration as well, multiple times. He's been here multiple times. He speaks to the president directly. It's why the United States basically is over 50% of NATO, both in troop commitments and in financial commitments as well. It's why we remain in NATO. It's why the president had a very positive visit in NATO. In the end, that's why we're in this alliance. And that's why Article 5 in the NATO alliance is important. And the president has reiterated that. We think it's a very strong deterrent against any of these fears or concerns that any of our allies in the region may have. And the president's been clear that we are committed to NATO, we're committed to the alliance, and our commitment isn't just rhetorical. Our commitment is in action, in the troops that have been deployed, in the monies that have been spent, in the capabilities that are located, in the cooperation and that work that we do every single day with our NATO allies. The only thing we're asking for, which is not unfair, is for our partners in the alliance to improve their own capabilities. Because the more capable our allies in NATO are, the more capable NATO is. We're going to keep doing our part. We just want them to do more. And they've committed to do more.
But these allies are saying that they are concerned now.
Sure. And that's why we have NATO.
So nothing has changed? Pax Americana, what the chancellor
I don't know.
said,
I don't know why he's saying that. You'll have to ask him why he's saying that. The truth of the matter is that NATO is the key defense alliance and agreement that has provided stability on the European continent. We believe it is stronger today than it's ever been because our allies have committed to increase their own defense spending. The more capable our allies are, we've already made our commitment. We've been spending billions and billions and billions. It's the single biggest part of the largest government budget in the world is defense spending in the United States. So we've already done our part, and our part isn't just rhetorical, it's real. We have troops stationed there, we have capabilities there, we have weapons we've provided our partners in the region as well. We believe that if you want a strong NATO, you want your allies in NATO to be stronger. The more capable our allies in NATO are, the stronger NATO is collectively. And that's why we're very pleased to see them make that commitment of 5%, with the exception of Spain. And that's why the president left our NATO gathering earlier this year so enthusiastic about the future of NATO and about our role in it. And in fact, that's why the president's been working with NATO countries on the Pearl program, which is what's providing weaponry to the Ukrainians today.